We begin together in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. God, we just thank you. We thank you for the gift of this day. We thank you for your very breath within us. And we thank you for gathering us here, that through the gift of technology, that we are able to be gathered beyond geography as we seek to find, we pray that you will open our hearts and our minds, that we might, in what we hear today, that as our understanding is deepened, that we might better able serve those that you love so very much, the youth and the families of our parishes, the catechists who serve with us. We pray simply, Lord, that in this time of meeting, you are with us. And we ask all of this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. I am so glad to be able to introduce you to Tom East, who is our presenter for today. Tom is, when I first began in ministry, he was with the Center for Ministry Development, and the resources that they provided for training and formation of leadership was certainly very real then and was very much a blessing to me, and it has continued to be blessing over the years in the parishes and the diocese that I've served in, and to new youth ministry leaders as Tom's work has continued. He's now serving as a pastoral assistant in RCIA, in marriage, and in grief ministry. And I'm just so grateful he's here and glad that over the years that I'm able to call him friend as well, and excited just to hear what he has to share with us today as we learn more about how we can best minister to Generation Z. So Tom, it's all you.
Great, thanks so much. I'm looking forward to this conversation, and just really looking forward to seeing what are some things that we would share together about how to minister with this amazing generation that God has privileged us to serve. I'm going to make my screen a little bit bigger. There we go, so I can see everybody. All right. Well, so as we get started, one of the things that struck me is that sense that we might be in different roles here. There's religious educators, folks who work in sacrament preparation with young people, people who work with families, youth ministers. I think whatever our role is, sometimes we have a hard time explaining to others what it is we do. I had a friend, and he always described his role as a parish youth minister. So he said, that's what he was. He was a parish youth minister. He also spoke kind of fast and with a little bit of a Southern accent. And so one time he was on a plane, and he said to the person asked him next door, he says, so what do you do? He said, I'm a parish youth minister. He says, oh, you're a parish youth minister? So like basically you're with people as they put everything they need in the backpack and they kind of jump out into the wild blue yonder. They just kind of jump out into the world. And he said, yeah, pretty much. That's what I do. That's what we do. We're there to help young people have what they need to jump out into the wild blue yonder, the world of adulthood. For us, it's also the world of discipleship. And so we kind of ask ourselves, what do we need to do that? And what do we need to be able to minister to this generation? Part of why we're gathered today is that, like all missionaries and all evangelists, we take the time to get to know the people that we're going to serve. And so I love this line from the National Director for Catechesis: those who proclaim the Christian message must know and love the culture and the people to whom they bring the message. So we start by knowing and loving the culture. I know that a lot of us in our roles at the parish, if we're working with young people and their families, sometimes we're helping to interpret them to the rest of the community. Sometimes the rest of the community is not privileged to have the direct experiences of young people that we have. And so their senses of who young people are can be really shaped more by media and stereotypes and what they're hearing in the news and what they're hearing in lots of those kind of sources. So we get to know young people better, and that way we can serve them better. We also get to interpret them for the community. As I'm thinking about the generational cohorts, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment, one of the things, it always reminds me, these generational cohorts, to this line from George Carlin. He says, have you ever noticed that anybody driving slower than you is an idiot, and anyone driving faster than you is a maniac? Now, when I saw that, I thought, gosh, that's true. Like whatever speed I'm choosing to go, that's the right speed. And I think in many ways, the generational cohorts can be like that as well. like whatever we identify, we're part of a generational cohort. On this call, I think we represent, a couple, maybe 3 different cohorts. And whatever framework we bring to it, then that's the right one. And people who are older than us, they're stuck in the mud. They're just clinging to the old-fashioned ways. People who are younger than us are brash. They don't have respect for tradition. They aren't willing to kind of earn their ticks to be able to make these kind of choices. So it can have that feel of just like complaining about the next generation. And complaining about the next generation is something that we've been doing for centuries. You see here, Aristotle talking about the young people. They have exalted notions because they've not been humbled by life or learned necessary limitations. They think themselves equal to great things. So like complaining about the next generation, as we can see, is something that we've been doing for a long time. So as people who work with youth and families, and we hope to evangelize youth and families, then we're people who I think need to have a good curiosity about who young people really are, and then be able to take these insights about the generational cohorts and use them as part of the puzzle for asking the question, how do we serve really well? This is a schema for 5 of the generations. The generation that would be before baby boomers is referred to as the Great Generation. Sometimes it's referred to as the World War II generation. The interesting thing is that talking about generational cohorts was really something, like many things, that the baby boomers kind of invented and made really big. Because boomers came on the scene big and loud and post-war, and just have been kind of impacting things for a long time. So they were raised by the builder generation, or as I said, the Great Generation, World War II generation. You'll notice in the way this schema is laid out that there's an overlap of years, and that's because the generational cohort thing, it's not an exact science. Each website or book that you read will have a little bit different framework. But the thing I would say from trying to compile a lot of different sources is that there's always a sense that there's a significant event that shapes a generational cohort, and that there's also people who are on the cusp. So people who are later within the generations, then they're going to feel like they have some attributes of the next one and some attributes of the previous one, but they don't quite fit either place. But usually there's a home that you fit a little bit better than others. So we notice that the baby boomers, 45 to 65, raised by the builder generation, and boomers get a lot of attention still, even if now it's so that people can say, okay, boomer, and kind of roll their eyes and that kind of thing. The boomers ended up raising 2 generations. So the early boomers were the parents for Generation X, 61 to 82. One of the things about Generation X is they notice that they often get forgotten completely. So people will talk about generational cohorts. There was even an article that I came across that said, generational cohorts, we have baby boomers and millennials, and what's next? It's like, you skipped a whole generation. And that just kind of happens, I think, a little bit. Gen X, of course, were the first latchkey generation. Lots of change that happened in the boomer years impacted those Gen Xers. And then you've got the millennials, who were raised by the later boomers. And so that would be true for my wife and I. We have 3 young adult daughters. At least 2 of them are millennials. The other one is on the cusp between Gen Z and millennial. And so you've got that interesting phenomena. And then we've got Gen Z. Roughly 1996 to about 2012. So these young people would be, the oldest would be 21, 20, 25, 26. And the youngest would be about 10 years old, 10 or 11. Largely, Gen Z was largely raised by Generation X. And then we see the next generation that we don't know a lot about yet, but most people are calling it the Alpha generation. So we went from Z back to A. Maybe 2010 is the start. They're mostly being raised by millennials, so my grandchildren would be Alpha generation. Early signs, just as a preview of what Alpha generation is like, the early articles and things, including one that I put in your resources and handouts, says that the Alphas are even more Gen Z-er than the Gen Zers. That is, a lot of the patterns established for Gen Z are kind of deeper with Alpha, but Alpha generation doesn't bring with it an awareness that what they're doing is different than the previous generation. For Alpha, their trends and things just are. They're just normative. And so that would be interesting for us as we venture into that ministry. even though we're many years now into studying Gen Z, we want to acknowledge that each young person is different and that we just don't know what we don't know. And there's, you know, a lot of times the things that make sense about generations can happen after the generation has passed, you know, and into adulthood. So there's a lot of things that we don't know yet. The other comment I'd make about generational cohorts is that generational cohorts are first studied by marketers because they're trying to figure out how to sell things to that generation. So they spend a lot of money trying to figure things out. And there's companies that are pouring a lot of money into trying to figure out the alphas, because those alphas are going to have a lot of disposable income in their adolescent years. So, you know, marketers try to figure out first, and then after marketers comes education and healthcare. And then the church kind of globs onto some of that information and insights and makes some trends of it. I would say that it feels like it's changing to me, because within the Catholic Church, we have some really good researchers doing some work now. I'll be introducing you to some research of the Springtide Institute, which is related to, as part of a ministry of the Christian Brothers that you're familiar with from St. Mary's Press. Then they gave birth to the Springtide Institute, and some of their research is very much applied research. They always look towards the bottom line of those of us who love youth. What should we know and what should we be doing? So I'm really excited about being able to share some of those resources with you. So Gen Z, and I'm going to ask you, raise your hand in the old-fashioned way, or you can use your reactions if you want, but I'd like to get your input. What are some of the stereotypes? We're well into this now. What are some of the stereotypes associated with Gen Z young people? What would you say? If you had to, I know that these aren't things that you hold, but what do you hear when you hear a stereotype about Gen Zers? I see light bulbs going on. I just need to see a hand come up. Mary? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm just jumping right in, sorry.
Go ahead, John.
I'd say some people say they're apathetic and they just don't care, or there's just kind of that vibe that they don't care about anything.
Yeah. So the apathetic and the apathy, which is kind of a low energy thing, can be associated also just not caring about anything. Oh yeah, whatever. It doesn't really matter. Interesting. Mary, it looked like you had a thought.
Oh, sorry.
There you go.
Okay. We just had a meeting not too long ago in our parish and talking about some of this, and someone had said that they are nonconformists, and they're not as well. They're not as inclined to commit to institutions. I mean, they'll commit to a gym or a health club or some things like that, but not so much like the institutional type of thing.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. And actually, there's a lot of research that backs up that institutional relationship, a lot of the trust that has been broken down in the institutional relationship to young people. It's very interesting that they're talking about that. Michelle, what are you thinking?
I think part of it too is being digital natives, the way that the relationship. So you certainly have the sometimes stereotypical, sometimes just accurate, the idea that they're in their phones rather than connecting in person, but also I think not a clear understanding of what they actually are accomplishing in terms of relationships that might have a digital aspect. But I think the idea is that they only have surface relationships, that they don't have that ability to connect deeply, whether it be in person. Really, I think they're judging the lack of in person from what they're seeing. So that idea that they're digital and not connected.
Yeah, and I think you raise a few important issues. One, that terminology of talking about digital natives. I think it's important terminology. Some of the millennials were the first digital natives. Gen Xers were the first ones who got really good at technology, but millennials were digital natives. And then those of us who were born before the millennials we can be really good at technology, but we're still digital immigrants. Like, we can get good at living in this land, but it was not the land we were born in. One of the ways I mark that for my oldest daughter, I remember working on my computer downstairs in the home office when she was a toddler, and she wrote her name on the screen first before she ever wrote her name with a crayon or a pencil. And I thought to myself at the time, her world will be forever different because she first created her name on screen. And then I look at my 7-month-old grandson, and he's completely enamored by screens. And for him, I think, to pull on what you're saying, Michelle, is there isn't a sense, like, I might think about, well, what's my digital connectivity to this dear friend, as though that's a piece of the pie. But for someone who's a digital native, there aren't pieces of the pie. There's just a relationship. And so sometimes we look at the relationships and we think they're surface. Sometimes that's because they are. And some young people tell us they don't have anyone to turn to. Sometimes we look at the relationships and we think they're surface because they don't make sense to us, but that's because they're different. So that's just the complexity of it. So it's interesting. I did want to comment on your comment, John, about the sense of just not caring about anything, or just the apathy. And some of the reading I've done that matches with my personal experience is that what feels like apathy is also a numbness from having cared so much about some things and being so badly hurt. So like that's a defense mechanism. It's like, well, I don't care about anything because I invested myself completely in this thing and it blew up. And so I think that what you're going to be hearing about the traits of the generation related to idealism. And I think that, that the apathy and the I don't care about anything, it can be on the other side of that. So it's something that certainly causes a lot of empathy. I want to talk about 3 particular stereotypes because I think they demonstrate the complexity. And I've got some fun pictures to go with them. Obviously, stereotype that they're text addicts. I love this one with the baby and the diaper being changed. We've got everyone on their cell phones, and we've got no, don't take the screen away. You're taking away my life. And what we can say about Gen Zers is that digital connections are given. This statistic has remained somewhat steady. There were some differences within COVID, but the connectivity was an average of 9 hours a day. And some of the connectivity they just really didn't enjoy when they were doing school online. There was a Zoom numbness and a fatigue. One of the things we could say, though, interestingly, is that Gen Z young people, there's also research that shows that they really prefer face-to-face communication in their important relationships. And when you talk to them, and when researchers have talked to them, they will say that they look forward to, or they would like, some unplugged time. Now, this is an interesting thing. They prefer and seek unplugged time, but they don't create it for themselves, mostly. So it's a preference. And we'll talk about that function of actually creating the things that they need. Another stereotype is that they're entitled. We've got the generation of entitled perfectionists. Similar, along with the millennials, they got a lot of participation trophies. It struck me with my daughter, who is kind of Gen Z, kind of millennial. When she was cleaning out her room, one of the things she did is she went and looked up online to see what should you do with all the trophies that you got. She was a debater, so she had a lot of trophies. So what the online suggestion was that you keep one special one and you take pictures of all the rest of them. And it just struck me that it was so quintessentially Gen Z millennial, because she looked up online to see what to do with all the trophies. And so there's that kind of sense of things. So in reality, because entitlement can have other aspects too, Gen Zers are accustomed to comfort. So they just a lot of them who have the means to experience comfort, and we know that a lot of young people don't have food security, they don't have home security, but for a lot of young people, they're pretty accustomed to comfort, and that can be a lot of name brand things. It can be always having the latest technology. But when you dig the surface a little bit, they're not particularly materialistic. They kind of expect those things, but when you really talk to them, they crave experiences more than stuff. So when you talk to a young person, what do they want the most? They'll talk about wanting to go on a safari in Africa. They talk about trips that they want to take and places they want to see, travel they want to do, experiences they want to have with their friends. So materialism in terms of things, they kind of expect the things to just be there. But materialism, if you want to find a materialistic generation, you get to go zoom back to the boomers, because they excelled at it. The boomers were the ones who kept up with the Joneses, and so a lot of that culture was established by the boomers. So it's interesting. The other thing about Gen Zers, and this is a little bit of a contrast with millennials and Gen X, they're actually economically kind of conservative. That they worry about money. They don't want to spend money if they don't have to, and they were very shaped by the Great Recession. So the Great Recession and now the tumult of COVID has shaped them economically. So they do not feel particularly secure that they will have what they need economically, no matter how hard they work and get educated. Like they feel like there's a great deal of uncertainty, and that shapes their relationship to money. And things. And I did want to highlight here too, that difference between intention and capacity. And I had some conversations with parents, and they'll talk about the fact that they see this idealism in their child, but then they don't see the capacities to make that idealism possible. And I'll say that that's a common gap. There's the intentions of our heart, and we know that. I have an intention to be more physically fit and to eat a better diet, but I don't always match that with making the choices around that. And that's true for our Gen Z, young people as well. And the last stereotype, generation lazy. Here's the young man. I'm doing my homework. Really, Mom, I'm doing my homework. They can be distracted, and they are definitely anxious. There's an anxiety epidemic amongst our young people. But some things to keep in mind, and when you're trying to help the community understand Gen Z young people, they have grown up in a constant state of war. Think about our world since 1996 and the number of global conflicts and uncertainty that they have lived through. They lived through many more than the previous 30 years. In just that time, 30, 40 years in that time frame. They were on track, and I believe they're still on track to be the most educated generation in history in terms of number of master's degrees that they're headed towards, the aspirations that they have. They are entrepreneurial, and they desire to address the root issue of challenges and change the world. So that's why one of the things we'll talk about is that they are at heart the young world changers. And so although they can be lazy, and this is where, what Mom said to me, he's like, my son, he tells me about all these ways he wants to change the world, and particularly caring about the environment. But she said, but the environment in his room is terrible. It's just messy and so that. It's like, well, those things are separate. The intention of his heart, and then, being able to keep a tidy room, which is not a particular priority for a 15-year-old. So, I'd like to give you a chance to talk about your experience of this generation in small groups. And so, John, even like groups of 3 would be great, I think, to give people a chance to really chat. I recommend to you that you take a picture of this slide that's on your screen, so that you can bring that with you into the group work, because I can't send it around as a message, because the way Zoom works with messages, you can only send a message once you're in the group. So if at least one person in each group takes a picture, they'll be in good shape. And then John's going to get us into those groups, and you'll be in the groups for about 8 minutes. So your questions are, how would you describe young people in Gen Z? What do you notice about their gifts and characteristics, and what are the challenges that they're facing? I want to use our time strategically. I'm going to hit some highlights, but want to let you know that this is really well resourced in the handouts as well. But these are some characteristics that I think are helpful for us to talk about. So just relationship with technology, we've already touched on a little bit. Obviously, they're very digitally integrated. Something to be aware of with Generation Z is they have some insights they can share with us as a parish about how to utilize technology to build relationships, and how to engage, with the community. Sometimes we look at it as you're either in the natural world outside on a trail, you're with people, or you're using technology. A lot of young people don't see that divide being a big dark line. So they're using technology to meet up with friends to go on a hike. And so it's like, it's not the either or thing. So they can help us figure that out. They can also, if we talk to young people, they can help us to know how to engage them with faith and technology. And now our engagement with faith and technology, it has to be that same stance that we've been talking about, where they're very interested and curious about faith traditions, maybe their own, lots of other ones as well. But they definitely come to us as inquirers. So like they have questions and they have curiosity, but they're not looking for the prepackaged. So being a catechist with a young person online, by helping them have resources and inviting them to think about things and talk with us and share with us, we take that same stance as a catechist of accompaniment rather than imparter of all things true. So it's an important part of that piece of things. The relationship to institutions impacts the next characteristics, is that they're expecting access. So I have to say, young people look at a parish and they look at the complexity of a parish. Like a parish, a friend of mine says, where two or more are gathered, one is in charge. Like the parishes have pretty stratified power structures. And we used to jokingly say before the age of key cards, that if you want to figure out who had power in a parish, then you get people together in a room and you have everyone put all their keys out on the table and see like who has a key to what, special closet and this or that. We're pretty complex. And I'd say working in a parish, I feel like our parish is complex to know who gets to make decisions about what, and how do you find this, and how do you become an altar server? How do you become a lector? Just basic questions that young people would ask. And it's just, there's so many relationships and layers of a parish. And a young person looking at a parish, they just say, I just want the app for that. What's the app? So I can go on the screen and punch, I want to be a lector, and I don't have to go through 12 conversations to get there. So I think that's something to be aware of. And I guess what I want to say is, I think this is our problem. This is our problem to solve as a parish. And when we create the access that Gen Zers are craving, we're going to make it so much better for everyone. So the things that young people are looking for from us as parish, they're going to make it a better parish for everyone. So they don't want prepackaged ways to engage and belong. They don't want to have one thing that they join and then that thing plods along and does all the same things, but they want a customized pathway to access just what they need, just what they're interested in. So I think I think that has a lot of implications for us. They're hungry for in-person connections and for transforming relationships. As we said, they actually, there's in their key relationships, face-to-face is the preferred way to communicate. They suffered a lot over these years of COVID because of not having the face-to-face, not having the touch and the things that are just natural to the way we interact and grow up. They're seeking relationship with adults and with peers, but they're seeking relationships that are based on mutual respect and understanding. They're seeking relationships that are walking side by side, not being pulled or pushed. And so that's the kind of relationship that they're aiming for. I mentioned that their nickname is the Young World Changers, that they are seeking to change the world. I think I really appreciate your comments, Cheryl, about the idealism and then the hurt that they have either from having their idealism squashed or feeling as though that their idealism is just impossible. And so I think it's a good thing to be aware of. This was the characteristic that when I interviewed my youngest daughter, and not interviewed, but I chatting with her about what I'm doing, and she says, well, Dad, I'm not a Gen Z, or I'm a millennial, just like my sisters. I said, okay, well, let me talk to you about some characteristics. And I talked to her about this one. She says, oh, yeah. She says, for me, she's like, I'm happy to do those service projects that you and Mom had me do and the church had me do. And she's very service oriented. She says, but really, I'd like to get to the heart of the issue. I want to figure out how to change the whole thing so it's different. I was like, no, that's very Gen Z. That's a very Gen Z characteristic. is wanting to get to the heart of it. And the fact is, we need people who want to get to the heart of it. They have grown up being voluntold, because somewhere along the line we figured out that service was a great way for them to learn. It's a great way for them to learn social skills and be in community beyond faith and church. Their schools, everyone has them do service. So there can be a numbness about that too, and even a little bit of cynicism that can happen. So at the heart, they're amazing idealists with really good ideas that are not our ideas. And they're different, and we need them. And so we need to figure out a way to circle around them and find a way to nurture. And when you want to think about it, is think about starting a campfire. When you try and think about nurturing the idealism of a young person, is, you know, it's don't overwhelm them with fuel immediately, but it's a few sparks and some tinder, and help the fire to grow at their pace and their speed, you know, and in the direction they want to go. You know, not so much how can you young person come be part of my dream, you know, as compared to tell me what you're dreaming about and how can I make that happen for you. I think it's a stance that we really need to take on. Young people are hungry for experiences of prayer, of silence, and mystery. They don't always articulate this, but they describe it in other ways. So they describe what they need, and when they experience silence, when they experience awe and mystery, and for some of them, they would articulate prayer, but not all of them would articulate it as prayer. That it has a powerful impact on what they're going through and what they experience. So it's good for us to be aware of this hunger that they have, and it relates a little bit to what we've already spoken of as this anxiety epidemic. When I first started doing workshops on Gen Z, we talked about the fact that 1 in 5 young people had a diagnosable anxiety disorder. And then we said 1 in 4, and we're saying 1 in 3, but I think it's going to be 1 in 2 very soon. It is an anxiety epidemic. Some of the reasons for the anxiety amongst young people, the uncertainty that we've talked about, the ground is always moving between their feet. This COVID thing was going to last 6 weeks, you know, and it's been 2.5 years. So it's been a long time, or it feels like 2.5 years. So overcommitment is one of the things that can lead to anxiety. Their beautiful, idealistic hearts can latch onto lots of things, and they cannot meet their own expectations, and that can be very hard on them. They're managing our expectations as well as their own. The overuse of media is a source of anxiety, because they get exposed to violence and danger and things that can have a numbing effect and be very hard. Overexposure to violence, especially, that might be more true amongst our young men in terms of the video games and those kinds of things you're experiencing. There's genetic factors for anxiety to be aware of, things that, you know, can be within families that we can help with. And so it's something, you know, as a church, we want young people to learn and grow in faith, but our first charge was to be the good news. So I would say this characteristic, it calls us to respond, and to respond in a way that makes young people feel better, something practical for their anxiety. Now I talked with a friend about this, Roy Pettifee, who does youth ministry and teaching and writes amazing books about pastoral care, because he's also a counselor and counsels youth, and he also is raised in a household of kids. One of the things he talked about, which surprised me, was he talked about liturgy. And he said, you know, it's Tom, interestingly enough, for some of the young people that I'm counseling, you know, I encourage them to go back to Mass, you know, and he said, there's something about the predictability, the pattern, the rote behaviors that liturgy and ritual provides that has this potential to calm and soothe. He said, you know, when we go to liturgy, young people can feel like they're on an equal footing, because all of us are sitting there in awe of something we don't understand, that's greater than us. And they feel like so much of their life is greater than their ability to understand. But when we're, you know, gathered around the table, this is beyond all of us, and we share in that. So I thought that was an interesting idea on his part. Certainly there's a lot of practical things that they need as well. But I guess I think it's important for us to realize, as we're responding to young people, that the things that are who we are as church are part of what can be soothing to them. But it is about a stance. Sometimes our ministerial and catechetical stance has been one from fear. We're afraid young people will lose the faith, so we minister to them in an intense way, and we want them to know these things and do these things. And at its heart, that's about making us feel better about the future and about what we're doing. So the stance has to be one to say, you are unbelievable children of God that I can't even fathom what I could learn from you and what God has planned for you. I would be honored to be part of your journey. So we have to really do a stance of being good news with them, which is a high level of respect for their journey. And we need to lose our sense of urgency about what they know and what they do. I think that'll help us to evangelize much more effectively. And when I say evangelize, I mean be good news to them, as well as invite them into the wonderful things God has planned. Another characteristic has to do with faith and science. We've heard a little bit about this over the years. Faith and science seem incompatible, which is reinforced by the culture. There's this rise of the nuns of having no affiliation. A few years ago, I was confirmation sponsor from one of my nephews, and I asked my sister about it. I said, well, what can you tell me about him? I'll talk to him, and she said, well, and she just, she talked about how attracted he was to science and that was causing an impact on faith for him. And all the kids he hung out with, just were very cynical about faith. So, I think there can be that. Certainly, when I was a youth minister many years ago working in a parish, we didn't even think about the relationship between faith and science. I think you're probably much more aware of how important it is to make those connections, so that we would see science leading to faith, which is its authentic role. We're not afraid what science discovers, where scientific discovery will lead us. Part of it is, this is a beautiful part of what we believe as Catholics. Like God created the scientists and those people who are seeking to learn things, and so we include those things. And we get a real bad rap, about our relationship to science from things that happened hundreds of years ago. And Bishop Barron has done a good job of talking about those things as well. Another characteristic I would mention would be that they want to explore new ways to learn. They're highly educated. 1 and 2 will be university educated. That's a quick rise, because it was 1 and 3 for millennials and 1 and 4 for Gen X. So this is a big deal. They crave learning and new information. They just expect engagement. They take that for granted, that should be happening, and when it doesn't happen, they're very disappointed that someone's kind of using their power position to engage them with information in a way that doesn't include them. They do have a short attention span, part of that ability to move from thing to thing, and they learn best through experience, firsthand experience, through collaboration, through creation of things, through engaging their senses, through emotions, through relationships. This attention span thing is a big deal. One of the researchers talks about their being consumers of snack-sized media, like little messages that they get spread out over time. The average American attention span is down to 8 seconds, and that's down from 12 seconds in 2000. Now, I always say what's interesting is that a goldfish's attention span is 9 seconds, so we're at 8 seconds. And notice that what the research says is, it doesn't say the average youth's attention span is 8 seconds. It says the average American's attention span. That includes us. So I think we just have to be aware of the fact that attention span, getting their attention, is something that we kind of earn, I think, through engagement. John Smith said, huh? Another characteristic would be, and this is an important one for us in terms of sharing the faith because of some of the challenges that we experience, is that young people are very tolerant. They're very diverse, and they're very tolerant of diversity. Kind of move beyond tolerant of diversity for Gen Z young people. They're very just affirming of diversity amongst their peers. They have this sense of, and they are not just diverse in terms of racially diverse, but also they're tolerant of differences. There's a fluid sense of gender identity as well as sexual expression, and they have to do a lot of translating of that experience for other generations. And so, I think most of us who are who have young adults or youth in our household would know that these conversations happen a lot, and it's a different scene at middle schools and high schools than it was, and sometimes the frameworks that we can bring to that, can be very limiting. So we need an awful lot of humility, I think, to enter into these conversations and to try and learn from their experiences. The tolerance issue is a significant issue for us, sharing faith, because their perception is that the Catholic Church is intolerant. So how it is that we can talk about these issues in a way that includes some of their ideas and some of the things they struggle with. One of the things I was teaching RCIA last night about marriage, and I was talking about some of the issues, including same-sex marriage, and I explained the Church's position about that. I taught that position, and I talked about the empathy that we need to have for people who approach the community with differences. But I said we also have to have empathy with those who struggle with this teaching. Like that's also something we're called to have empathy with. And because the fact that they struggle with these things does not put them outside of the community. It's like they're people who are with us, and we're struggling and trying to figure these things out. And let's kind of withhold the judgment, I think, on that in a way that excludes. In terms of the diversity in the U.S. 2020, 55% of those under 18 non-Caucasian. There's a 50% increase in youth who identify as multiracial since 2000. So we're now going to enter into some of the research that is, I'm going to say, I'm looking for some more research to have to kind of put it into focus, because there's some alternative stuff. The next slide I'm going to share with you is a pre-COVID slide. And this is a pre-COVID slide. So this is going back a few years. That was saying that Generation Z was more religious and more spiritual than the previous generation, than the millennials and the baby boomers. They had whole sets of graphs and charts that are part of your handouts. So I'm sharing this with you with a little bit of skepticism about this and wondering how COVID's impacted it. I'm going to share some 2021 research to balance this out. But just right off the bat, how does this strike you in your experience of the Catholic parish? Someone have an insight about, if you were to say, do you think Gen Zers are more religious and spiritual than millennials, or less, or the same, or how has it impacted practice, or do we just not know? Anyone have a thought? I see the light bulbs and the pondering going on. So this screen that you're seeing shows a 2021 report. But let me bring the last screen up, because I didn't talk about it very much because I thought you were seeing it. This is the fact that young people were more religious and spiritual. Their participation in religion is up compared with previous generations. 47% they were religious, additional 31% said they were spiritual but not religious. And this compared favorably to the millennials and the Gen Xers, and even favorably compared to baby boomers at the same age. So it's interesting, but now I'm going to share a little bit of the 2021 research. This resource, Navigating Uncertainty, there's a link in your handouts that you can go to, and you can download this resource for free if you give them your email address. And that'll only be true for a period of time. So after that, they'll start selling it. So I encourage you to download it and get it as a PDF so that you have access to it, because there's a real roundness to the resources that they brought into this resource. Some of the things they found out, according to them, 71% of the young people they spoke to said that they are religious, and 78% said they are spiritual. So that's interesting. But 58% of young people said, they told them, I do not like to be told answers about faith and religion. I'd rather discover my own answers. So this matches with things we've talked about in terms of this stance of inquiry, that where stance have come, and this is a place that has home for your questions, and let's talk about these things. 54% say that religious communities just try to fix my problem instead of just being there for me. So again, this goes to stance and how important that could be. Speaking of being there for them, we asked when you felt overwhelmed and didn't know what to do about something, who did you turn to for help? And 55% said my friends. You can see how it goes down: family, someone from school. 16% said no one, and the same number of people said someone from my faith community. So that's not as high as we would want it to be, I think. Interestingly, 70% of young people said that they won't take for granted relationships and opportunities the way they did before the pandemic. I'm going to jump to their conclusion. Under the what we should do is the key insight we should understand about youth in 2021 is that they use this term faith unbundled, because it describes that young people are increasingly constructing their faith by combining elements of beliefs, identity, practices, and communities from a variety of religious and non-religious sources. So we always knew that the task of an adolescent was to construct their personal creed, and that sometimes has a variety of sources, many of them are relationships that they choose. I want to be like this person, so I'm going to take on this aspect of a creed. But we now more blatantly understand that they're relying upon a variety of sources and not just one, and that part of what the resource was pointing to was this trust of institutions. So they don't trust one institution to provide everything that they need. Now that doesn't mean that they can't appropriate and identify with the Catholic faith as a primary part of their creed. But it does mean that the way we minister to them, I think it has some differences to it, something for us to be aware of. So these are the characteristics we've talked about. And one thing that strikes me is that I think we're left with what I call the Pentecost moment of what does all this mean? The other thing they asked at that moment of the Pentecost was, are all these people drunk? What does all this mean? Like, what does this mean for us? And there's some things that strike me as being very central. One is young people need to know how much they're loved, primarily. That we start with that love relationship and this desire they have for an encounter with a loving God, and for people to accompany them and take a stance of empathetic listener in their life. I also think that, that this also points us to things that they don't want. I think that's even more clear. They don't want to be force-fed into joining a group, and a group that plods along and experiences all the same things. I see a lot of heads nodding on that. They don't want a passive reception of information dispensed on our timeline. When I was a kid, if I had a favorite TV show, I would wait each week to watch it. And that's not happening now. They have a favorite show they can binge watch, and they get to download them all and watch them all. So they're used to brokering information, and if they're super interested in stuff, they can get more. And we're used to kind of metering it out on our own timeline. So I think we need to question that a little bit. They're not looking for a way to be bored. They're not a captive audience. Even when they're with us, sometimes they're not with us. And I think we need to earn the right to be heard through engagement and through a lot of creativity in how we use their time really, really well. And they're not looking for a place where they feel locked out. And sometimes that's how they experience the parish, is they can feel locked out. So we want to really look at who we are. Now, in the resource that John sent around, I have a whole lot of what I call on-ramps that I think are good to explore, but they're really well explained in the resource. So I'd like to use this little bit of time that remains to introduce you to another resource that I also sent around. This also comes from Springtide. I sent the PDF for it. It's called The New Normal: 8 Ways to Care for Gen Z Youth in a Post-Pandemic World. It's talking about ways to rebuild trust, to understand where young people are, and exercise empathy. So some of the things that they talk about are the need to create safety, to help young people regain their footing, to grieve what's been lost without dwelling on the negatives. I thought there was so much wisdom to that. How can we grieve what's been lost? There's proms that never happened. There's things that have been lost, but we don't want to dwell on those, but we're kind of starting with the stance of really respecting the young person. We need to celebrate what's been gained without insisting on optimism. We need to resist comparison by making space for a range of emotions. We need to get together. I think we need to gather when we can to combat isolation and to have intentional gatherings where we're using their time really well and respectfully. We need to take care of the body and to help the body and the mind process stress. So we do things to help them and help ourselves take care of the body. We could turn to arts and nature to find new modes of expression. And we need to focus on the practical. What do they practically need? What's the concrete help they practically need? That becomes agenda item number 1 for us. I'm going to invite you to take a picture of this and then spend a few minutes back in our pairs or small groups. And just to say, you know, looking at this, the questions I'm going to ask, I'm going to put this screen back up. You can also take a picture of this screen if you have a chance. What do you sense you need the most? How do your resources compare with that? And what do you most want to do to welcome youth back to ministry and accompaniment? So I'm going to invite you to, and I think John will pass the questions around, but I'm going to invite you to think about this list and just what you've been hearing, to say, you know, what do we want to do, and what do we have the capacities to do to respond to this amazing generation that God's gifted us? And Cheryl, are you raising your hand? One of the things I would say is that if there was ever an invitation to change things, the last 2 years have been that invitation. Like, you know, the whole, well, we can't change the way we've been doing things. We have now, all of us, been given the golden ticket of permission to change things up. And so, you know, so we have to say, what will we do with that golden ticket? And the other opportunity I want to point to is, I'm wondering here in our parish, can we use the synod listening time to be a good reason to gather with young people and also learn from them what we need to be doing? Could we use that as part? Because we've been telling people in our synod listening, you know, that this is going to impact us as a parish, you know, as well as the global church. You know, so we've been invited to gather with people and listen to their experience of our journey together. Let's gather some young people and let that inform our practice. So we have been invited by the Holy Father to do our ministry in a missionary key. And those of us who are familiar with music, we know that the key that you play a song or sing a song in is hugely important how it's experienced. That you can take the most joyful song in the world and you change the key to a minor key and it'll feel like a funeral dirge. So I think he's pretty intentional in using this language. What does it mean to do ministry in a missionary key? And I think that the missionary key is part of this invitation to change. It says we seek to abandon the complacent attitude that says we've always done it this way. And furthermore, we go on to see that sense of we want to be invited into the task of boldly and creatively rethinking the goals, structures, and methods of evangelization in our communities. So this is a mandate we got pre-COVID, and then COVID came along, and the mandate is all the bigger. And so I think, you know, we need to support each other in this. We need to give each other tips about how we're doing this. But the responding to Gen Z young people and the faith and their families, I think, is about looking big picture. And I do want to provide another scriptural image, which is the image of Samuel. You know, we're familiar with this story and how Eli responds to Samuel, the young person. And, you know, it's like, you know, Samuel's coming to Eli, keeps saying, you know, you called me. And eventually we can take on and be like Samuel. One of the things Samuel did right from the get-go is Samuel Eli put Samuel into the place that is close to the holy. So we have that sense of how do we place young people close to what is holy? How do we teach them how to respond? So you notice that what Eli didn't do was Eli didn't say, well, let me talk to God to see what he wants to say to you, and then I'll interpret it for you. But Eli says, speak, Lord, your servant is listening. So Eli was facilitating a direct relationship between the young person and the God that loved him. I think that's what we do too, is we facilitate that relationship. We don't get to keep credit for it. It's not our creation, but we get to facilitate that. What a privilege, what an honor. And then we get out of the way. That's what Eli did exceptionally well, is he got out of the way of this relationship between God and his beloved. And I think that's what we can do with young people as well. So I'm delighted that you've given me this time to share with you. I'm hoping that there's the conversation is helpful. I hope the resources are helpful. And if you have an insider question, I'd make myself available to you beyond this time. And just, you know, we're in this together. And I just think it's a sign of leadership of your deanery that you're continuing to tackle these issues. I went on your website and saw some of the other things that you're doing, and I just think it's remarkable that you're so committed to supporting each other. So I want to thank you for the invitation.